Hello, and welcome back to the Agati Video Podcast. This is a space where we host conversations with different designers, architects, and industry thought leaders to help educate you in your work. My name is Joe Agati, and I'm the COO and Director of Design here at Agati Furniture. For today's episode of the podcast, we have the opportunity of talking with Maureen Arndt, a founder principal of 720 Design, an architecture design firm focused on library design and public safety architecture. Welcome to the podcast today, Maureen. How you doing?
Thank you, Joe. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, it should be. I think this is gonna be a lot of fun today. So, I usually try to start off just getting a background, like how have you ended up where you are today?
Well, my story is that I grew up in Northwest Indiana on a small corner of my grandfather's farm. And so we, as a rule, didn't really do summer camps as a family. But one summer, when I was in fourth grade, my mom signed me up for a camp. And she dropped me off at the Chesterton Public Library, where the librarian gave all of us a sketchbook and a set of pencils, and we walked around our small town and learned about architecture the whole week. And when I left that camp, that's when I knew that I wanted to be an architect. And so when I graduated architecture school and went to work, I went to a firm that worked on libraries. And so my practice has kind of come full circle from a fourth grader learning about architecture at the library to being an architect that designs libraries.
Oh, that's very cool. I didn't know that. I always find it interesting, especially as, doing more of these kind of like podcasts. I'm kind of getting to know people that we've worked with in the past, kind of like on a deeper level. And I always find it fascinating that most often when people like, kind of focus and specialize in the library industry, they have like some kind of connection back to like, whether it's childhood or, even college or something, they have that kind of connection back to the library. So that's great that early on. What a fortuitous circumstances for it.
It really was one of those kind of life-changing, change your world events for sure.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, so I guess, going from there, it seemed like you were able to kind of find your passion early on. So what is your kind of passion and your kind of, approach and design or approach towards architecture, especially kind of like looking at, from the library perspective?
Well, every library project is very different. It's really kind of a microcosm of the culture of the community. And so we have the opportunity to learn something from every project that we do and do something a little bit or a lot different in that library, depending on what really fits the culture of that community and what we've learned from talking to the people in the community. I'm working on a project right now for a city that is building their first ever library.
Oh, wow.
And so, yeah, this has been a really interesting process because there's no preconceived notions other than their experiences with other libraries outside of the city. And so it's really been an opportunity to invent what a library is for this community. So we actually spent a lot of time before we even picked up a pencil to start designing, working with a community task force, doing discovery tours. And we went to 8 or 9 libraries across the state of Texas. We had 11 community focus groups. We did an online survey. We got information from as many people as possible about what it meant to be a library and a community center for the city. So that's been a really fun and interesting process to start from nothing and really create that unique experience for them. It led to a really interesting partnership too, because some of the folks that we interviewed were actually department heads for the makerspace at the schools. And so that's developed into a partnership of the makerspace teachers training students to then work at the library in their future makerspace.
Oh,
So
interesting.
really interesting the partnerships that you can develop as well by engaging the community.
Yeah, interesting. Well, going back to what you said earlier, and kind of picking on like saying like the libraries are these microcosms and trying to understand that. You kind of touched on this a little bit. Is that like a typical process, or like what is your typical process to start to understand kind of what that microcosm is, and then how do you take that and kind of bring that into the library space?
It's really important to make sure that a public library, it's really the one government building that people want to go to, right? You go for a really positive reason, for education, for
It's a good point.
entertainment, for community building. And so it is a different process from other kind of government buildings. So we really do try to take our time at the very beginning
Mm-hmm.
and understand where they're coming from, where they are now, and what the future looks like. And so we're looking at demographics and standards, but also subjective things. We just had a community meeting last week in a community where we had them voting on outdoor spaces.
Mm.
What are the best types of outdoor spaces that can help serve the community for programs and events,
Mm.
arts and crafts, and
Mm.
things like that. So taking some of the indoor spaces out.
Interesting. Speaking of kind of like outdoor spaces, that's one thing that I can't let you get away with without us asking is trends. What's going on? I've done a number of trend talks recently because that seems to be top of mind, and that's very typical after you come out of a world of upheaval. I don't know if you want to call the last 2 years that. People are always kind of like, well, what's next? What's going on? So yeah, what's your kind of take on trends that you're seeing?
Yeah, so there are a lot of lessons learned from the last couple of years. We're seeing some trends, definitely in outdoor spaces. In instead of designing really big multi-purpose spaces, they may be smaller indoors with expansion to overflow outdoors. So even garage doors connecting a multi-purpose room to an outdoor space. Um, we're seeing a trend when we ask people what's important about a library, they talk a lot about kind of the people spaces. So the places to gather. And I think coming out of being quarantined for so long that people are really looking for a comfortable and safe space to gather. And then I think the third really big one is all about technology. And so, how does technology tie into both the user experience? So, we're designing a large public library right now that um, has the world's biggest T-Rex skeleton inside of it because it's in a building that was a former rocket manufacturing plant. But Rexy the T-Rex will speak to people as they come in when it's time for the library to close. And then there are footprints in the floor that when the kids or anyone steps on them, they vibrate, make a little noise. And so using that program technology to really design something unexpected in a public library, perhaps.
So you kind of talked about this at the beginning of what we talked here, just on this question that, it seems like you're seeing more of a trend since everybody's been kind of like forced to be apart. You're noticing people wanting to come back together. I mean, I'm kind of seeing similar things.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about this in our design viewing behavior. It's like, oh, well, is everybody going to want to have social distancing for everyone? Like, well, no, nobody wants it. It was necessary. And I think as human beings, we want to see close, we want to have some kind of proximity to people. You just sounds like you're seeing that come through like on your projects and what people are looking for in their spaces.
We are starting to see that come through, but in different ways than we were before. So instead of having one big 200-person multi-purpose room, libraries are asking maybe for 3 that hold 50 so that it's a smaller group. You still can spread out a little bit more, but still be together. And
Yeah.
so it really is changing the space planning aspect from that perspective.
Yeah, that's one thing that I've noticed where again we get asked a lot, well, what's changed in the post-COVID world? That's, or how have we changed our design? And I usually tell people, I'm like, well, I think a lot of it there hasn't been as much change. I think there's now more tolerance for understanding of like, yeah, we shouldn't have one giant room. Maybe it should be a few smaller rooms, and to accommodate that slight variance and that you're going to need across different demographics. It seems like we're willing to like hear that more. I'm not sure how long that'll hang on. It's nice. It's nice because I think you're able to speak to more people. So are you seeing kind of the same thing happen as you work on projects as well?
We are seeing that, and we're seeing using some mobile dividers also within those spaces so that you have the flexibility to expand when you need to, right? So if you've got those 350-person rooms and you've got a divider that can go up between each of them, you can convert to 100-person or 150, or set it up differently for stations or different activities in the corners of the room. Really, it's all about that flexibility, right? As always, flexibility and making sure that a space is never a single use space. It's always a multi-use space and easy to convert.
Yeah, that lead me into my next question, to say how much is flexibility coming in? Because again, in times of change, it seems like that's what people to kind of gravitate towards. And I think especially like a library where you're servicing so many different kind of types of activities, so many different demographic of people in one day. I mean, it can change dramatically. Like so you talk about mobile dividers, I mean, it sounds like that's a big topic that comes up, and I'm assuming if so, like, how are you guys handling that?
It's a huge topic. And so the room dividers is one way. Probably 7 or 8 years ago, we started doing some of the collection on casters. And now we're seeing all of the collection on casters.
Oh, wow.
Because the library wants to be able to convert spaces into having a large program space. The space behind me, those are all on casters. I'm trying to lean out of the way. And so this is the Seguin Public Library in Central Texas. When they have a program, they can roll, that's the adult fiction collection behind me, they can roll it out of the way, and they have a 2-story program space that's open and really flexible. So that's another way that we're looking at it as well.
Interesting. Are you seeing, I just came back from ALA like a month ago. Prior to the pandemic, there was, still that kind of trend. And I think people were understanding like there's a difference between kids and adults. And now it's like, well, it's not just kids, it's young kids. It's like preteens, teens, young adults, elderly, again, pushing on that space constraint and flexibility. Are you seeing kind of more understanding, and I don't know if you'd call it programming or planning for that kind of like almost specific slice of the demographics in the environments?
We are to some extent, but then it gets back to the flexibility. So I'm thinking in particular about a teen area where we want a space that's dedicated to the teens, but a lot of people like to check out the collection, the young adult collection. And so how do we create a social collaborative space for the teens, but still have their collection accessible to the adults that want to check out an interesting young adult novel? And also just kind of thinking about intergenerational potential. We're actually working on 3 projects right now that are co-located libraries and senior centers.
Oh, interesting.
So it is really interesting because it gives some really big opportunities for some of that intergenerational activities. Can the kids teach the seniors how to do tricks on their iPhone? And can the seniors teach the kids gardening or chess or activities like that? And how do you really promote those kinds of interactions when those two specific departments are in one space.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah. So are you seeing, like, it's funny you bring that up. I think the co-locating of library spaces, like, I started to kind of see that more and more about 5, 6, 7 years ago. And it seems to kind of be coming up more and more. I think one, my guess is there's some like really good cost benefits of doing it that way. When a library is kind of, unfortunately not enough is invested into our libraries and our library systems. So I think I think a lot of people have done it from like interesting like financial partnerships to kind of get this space. But yeah, there seems to be also this kind of like symbiotic relationships. For example, like we worked on a project in Philadelphia where they co-located the library, the first floor of a children's hospital. So kind of added this kind of other great benefit. And it's interesting to hear you say, with a senior center, are you seeing more and more of that now?
We are seeing more and more of that, and I think you're right. Some of it is the synergies of each of them needs multi-purpose spaces, and sometimes they're at different parts of the day. Because the other part of this is when you build a library or a senior center or any other public building, you don't want 2,000 square feet of your space sitting empty at any time during the day, right? And so there's some opportunities for there's story time in the morning, there's the senior lunch, and then the teens come in for homework, and then there's a dance at night. And so that space is being used all day, every day, really being an efficient use of the space.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's I think one benefit, I think people are finally getting over the hump. Or maybe it's just because I'm in the world a little bit more, but people seem to finally be getting over this hump that the library is not just like the place you dump the books. It is that really multifunction. Because I remember a few years ago, it was like, especially just before the pandemic, everybody's like, well, this is where you go to get the books. And it's like, well, no, I think that's a very dated view of it, but it seems like we're starting to get past that. Are you noticing that more?
I am noticing that more. And it partly is because of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
During the pandemic, people started using the library's website to access downloadable materials, ebooks, streaming, e-magazines, because they weren't going out. And that trend has continued to go up. And so as that use of digital materials goes up, it means we need less physical materials, which means we can do more study rooms and multi-purpose rooms and technology and all of the things that make a library unique to its community, in addition to the collection that is definitely still the brand. It's just coming in different formats.
Yeah, interesting. So on the furniture side, we're rarely involved in discussions about collection and collection counts. Like usually people are coming to us and like, hey, we've made this decision. But you're probably, I'm assuming you're involved in that. How are people like handling that now? I mean, I know there's been a trend towards reducing collections. How does a library go about trying to make those decisions?
It's a tricky decision, and it's definitely looking at, and I am not a librarian or a collection development specialist, but this is what I've observed is that, librarians are really curating their collection to their community. So meeting people where they are, what is the collection that they want? What is the collection that they need? How can it be supplemented digitally? And then what's the right balance for people space to book space?
Interesting. Have you noticed, like, prior to going to ALA, we started getting a lot of like requests for book display. There's a lot of book display. And it was interesting. I went to a talk or two about circulation and the space, and there was one where they kind of talked about the demographic, and then he kind of trickled on to like thinking about how to like really move books. And he brought up a really good point. He's like, viewing the books like this, is a really not an optimal way. As soon as they're on display and you can just see it, like they move. Have you noted, anecdotally, we were kind of just seeing like, why are all these book display requests coming in? Are you seeing more and more requests for that?
Yeah, I think that's right. That face out when you can see the cover, it checks out more. There was a phrase, stack them high and watch them fly.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, kind of back to the point of curating the collection of then having that display, learning from bookstores, that you've got the most popular materials that your community's requesting. And so you could have different types of display units that it takes up more space than doing it spine out the way you were describing. But if you're checking more out, which is the goal, right? Then that balance itself out as well.
Interesting. So I want to shift gears for a second, still talk about projects though, but I want to just put you on the spot a little bit. What's your kind of favorite project you're working on right now?
Well, I mean, you're asking me to pick my favorite child.
I know. It's always fun to ask this question, just watch people squirm just a little bit.
But I am working on several interesting projects at the moment. I told you about the community that doesn't have a library. That's been really interesting, and we're in the conceptual design process of that. We're also working with the city that's converting the rocket factory into a library. And that was a really interesting process. We've been working with them since 2012. We did the facilities master plan for them. And when we did the community meetings, even though this was a community of about 250,000 people, they said they didn't want a branch system. They wanted one big library where they could get what they want when they want it. And they were willing to drive to get to it, which was different than the previous facilities master plan. And so that sent us off looking for a space. And the city happened to own this former rocket manufacturing plant. And it's about 156,000 square feet.
Oh, wow.
The center spine is 42 feet tall, and that's where the T-Rex skeleton will go to kind of set some scale for the space.
Yeah.
It's going to have a children's museum, about 4,000 square feet of children's museum space. So getting to do some interesting things because the community decided to invest their library dollars all in one location. And then the third project that I'm working on is a library that's an anchor for a historic downtown. And as part of the 65,000 square foot library, they're building a parking garage that will serve the library and the downtown businesses. So it's really an economic driver for supporting the restaurants and the stores that are downtown. But when we did the parking garage, we realized we could make a connection across the second floor from the parking garage to the children's area and create a children's outdoor roof deck where they can show movies and do STEM and STEAM activities, still within the library footprint, but outside, which I think will be really interesting.
Yeah. Speaking of outdoor, again, not to jump back to trends, that seems to be something that people are really taking advantage of now, especially post-pandemic, which is a nice kind of trend. I mean, as much as, someone that enjoys the outdoors, how are you seeing people kind of tackle that, as an opportunity for their library?
It's really important, even here we're based in Texas. And as we talked about, it's been 109 every day this week. We still want outdoor spaces. They have to have shade. They have to have access to water. But those outdoor spaces have become really important. And it's for everything from having a story time to we're working on a library that's going to have a grove of trees with hammocks on them. So reading hammocks outside the library, places to study, and then places that the community can come when the library's closed to access the internet. For homework for businesses, that was a big lesson that was learned during the pandemic, that we still have a large percentage of the population that needs access to high-speed internet, and it might happen when the library is not open.
Yeah, interesting. So I guess I also want to get your perspective on her. What would be, as you reflect on your kind of career, what would maybe be like one of your most like proud moments that you've had?
Well, I guess I feel pretty lucky every day when I wake up and I realize it's another day that I get to design a library. It's um, it's really rewarding to know, like you said at the beginning of this, all the people that that the library has been kind of a changing point in their lives. And so to be able to design spaces that have the potential in the future to be a life-changing moment for people, or even a day-changing moment, right? Finding the book or movie they want to watch at the library. It's been a really rewarding career for sure.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, like you said, I think we're putting this together, over 300 library projects across the country. It's a lot of projects.
It is a lot of projects.
So in all of that, I guess, put you on the spot again. What would you say is like kind of been the biggest challenge you've kind of had to overcome?
That's a hard question. I mean, there are certainly design challenges on every project that we have to overcome. There's always something interesting in the site, in the community's needs, in the budget, that we have to be super creative to overcome. But that's what makes all of this interesting. If it were the same library over and over again, it would be pretty boring.
Yeah. So Maureen, thank you for your time today. This has been a really great conversation. Are there any kind of other inspirational thoughts you want to leave our listeners or viewers here today?
Well, my big thought is that as you're embarking on planning or designing a new space or renovating a space, that you always remember that a really detailed plan is important. Engaging the community is probably the most critical part of that component, making them feel part of the project and reflecting what it is that the community needs. And never lose sight that as you go through the design process, it's really a gift that you're giving to the community of a place for people to come and to gather and to make those community connections. The library changed my world, and you never know whose world you're changing when you open those doors every morning.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, I want to thank you for your time today and, sharing your kind of your passion for what you do. It definitely comes through.
Thanks, Joe.